They tell a certain kind of woman that she is too much, too soft, too available, too forgiving, too easy to love, and too hard to leave. And nobody ever warns her what happens on the day that finally changes. Because the truth is, when a genuinely loving woman is betrayed by a man she trusted, it does not just break her heart, it quietly rewires her. And the part almost nobody talks about is that this rewiring is the single most attractive thing that will ever happen to her, even though it starts as the most painful. Let me tell you what I mean, because I don't want you to hear this as some cute little affirmation. I want you to actually understand the mechanics of what happens inside a woman who gives real love, and what happens the moment that love gets taken advantage of. You know her. Maybe you are her. She's the one who remembers his coffee order after one conversation, the one who notices when his texts get shorter and quietly wonders what she did wrong before it even occurs to her that maybe it isn't about her at all. She forgives the canceled plans. She rationalizes the mixed signals. She tells her friends he's just going through something long after her friends have stopped believing it. She isn't naive. She's generous. There's a difference. And most people never learn to see it. And here's the thing about a woman like that. She doesn't love in half measures. When she chooses you completely. And for a while, that kind of love feels like magic to the man receiving it. He feels seen. He feels chosen. He feels like, for once, someone is actually paying attention to the parts of him he usually has to hide. But here's what almost nobody explains about male psychology, and I want you to really sit with this. Attention that is freely given without ever being tested, without ever having to be earned again and again, starts to lose its meaning to certain men, not all men. But enough men that this pattern repeats itself in relationship after relationship, city after city, decade after decade. Some men don't recognize the value of a woman's love until they've watched it start to disappear. And that is not because men are cruel. It's because human beings generally undervalue anything that feels guaranteed. Psychologists call it the mere scarcity effect. I call it one of the great heartbreaks of modern dating. So this woman keeps giving. She keeps showing up. She answers the late night message even when she told herself she wouldn't. She gives the benefit of the doubt one more time. She tells herself that if she just loves a little harder, a little more patiently, a little more understandingly, eventually he will meet her there. And for a while, hope feels like enough. Then the betrayal happens. It doesn't always look the way movies tell you it looks. Sometimes it's not another woman's name lighting up his phone. Sometimes it's smaller and somehow crueler than that. It's the slow realization that he was never actually building anything with you. He was just enjoying being loved while he figured out what he really wanted. It's finding out he told someone else the things he swore only applied to you. It's the moment you understand that the version of him you fell for was at least partly a performance, and the real him was quietly making other plans the entire time. And here is what happens in that moment, the part almost nobody prepares you for. A loving woman doesn't usually explode. She doesn't usually scream or throw things or make a scene. Although if she does, please no judgment. That's a valid response to heartbreak too. But the more common reaction, the one that defines what happens next, is silence. Internal, devastating silence. She starts asking herself the questions that no one should have to ask about someone they loved. Was any of it real? Did he mean any of it, or was I just convenient? Did I imagine the way he looked at me, or did I just want to believe it so badly that I stopped checking if it was true? That is the most dangerous phase for a woman like this, because it's the phase where she is most likely to blame herself. Maybe I was too much. Maybe I should have given him more space. Maybe if I hadn't asked so many questions, he wouldn't have pulled away. This is the exact moment where I want you to pay very close attention, because this is where most women either lose years of their life to a man who never deserved that kind of loyalty, or they discover something that changes the entire trajectory of how they love from that point forward. Here's the truth. A man who truly wants you does not need you to shrink, to ask fewer questions, to want less, to need less. If your presence, your needs, your very reasonable desire for consistency made him pull away, that was never about you being too much. That was about him not being ready, not being available, or simply not being the right fit for the kind of love you're capable of giving. And I know that's a hard sentence to actually believe when you're in the middle of the pain. But it's true, and somewhere underneath the hurt, you already know it's true. So what actually happens next once the self-blame starts to wear thin? This is where the transformation begins, and it's worth understanding in detail, because this is the part that changes everything about how she shows up in love from here forward. The first thing that happens is that she stops explaining herself. For months, maybe years, she had been the one softening her tone, rewording her texts 3 times so she wouldn't sound too needy, apologizing for feelings that were completely reasonable. And one day, without any dramatic decision, she simply stops. She says what she means. She doesn't cushion it. She doesn't perform smallness to keep the peace anymore. The second thing that happens is she stops chasing clarity from people who benefit from her confusion. This one is subtle, but it's enormous. A woman who has been betrayed learns, sometimes the hard way, that some men will keep you in a state of uncertainty on purpose because uncertainty keeps you invested. If he's never quite sure where he stands, he checks his phone more. He tries harder, he stays hooked, hoping the next conversation will finally bring the clarity the last 5 didn't. Once a woman recognizes this pattern, she stops playing that game entirely. She doesn't need him to define it. She defines her own standards and checks whether he meets them, not the other way around. And the third thing, the thing that genuinely unsettles the men who once took her for granted, is that she becomes unreachable in a way that has nothing to do with anger. She's not punishing him. She's not waiting for an apology so she can decide whether to forgive him. She has simply quietly moved her attention somewhere else, onto her own life, onto her own goals, onto people who show up the way she always showed up for others. And there is nothing more disarming to a man who is used to being chased than a woman who was clearly capable of loving him deeply, and yet, when he wasn't worth it anymore, loved herself enough to leave without a single dramatic scene. Now, I want to pause here and talk about why this shift is not just emotionally healthy. It is genuinely, measurably more attractive. Not in a manipulative, play hard to get sense, because that's not what this is about. And frankly, that kind of game playing usually falls apart the moment real feelings show up. I'm talking about something deeper. Confidence rooted in self-respect is magnetic because it signals something true, that this woman knows her worth independent of whether any particular man recognizes it. Men, whether they can articulate it or not, feel the difference between a woman who needs them to complete her sense of self and a woman whose sense of self is already whole, who is simply deciding whether he gets to be part of a life that's already good. That second woman is rare, and rare things get noticed. Let's talk for a moment about the psychology of why some men pull away from women who love generously, because understanding this will save you years of confusion. It is almost never about you being too much. Very often it is about a man's own relationship with intimacy. Some men were raised in homes where emotional closeness felt unsafe, unpredictable, or simply unmodeled. So when a woman offers steady, consistent love, something in them doesn't know how to receive it. It feels foreign. Sometimes it even feels suffocating, not because the love itself is too much, but because he has never built the internal capacity to hold that kind of closeness without wanting to run. This is not an excuse for bad behavior. Betrayal is still a choice, and choices deserve accountability. But understanding the psychology behind it can save you from the trap of thinking there is something wrong with you for loving well. There isn't. You just, at some point, gave that love to someone who wasn't emotionally equipped to protect it. Here's a scenario I want you to really picture because I think you'll recognize it. You meet someone. The chemistry is instant, almost dizzying. He texts constantly in the beginning. He makes plans 2 weeks out. He tells you things he says he's never told anyone. And for the first 6 weeks, it feels like the two of you are writing something extraordinary together. Then slowly the texts get shorter. He starts being busy in a way that feels different than actually being busy. He still shows up just enough to keep you hoping, but never quite enough to make you feel secure. You start performing detective work on his behavior, trying to find the exact moment things shifted, as if identifying the moment will somehow let you undo it. I want to tell you something that might sting a little, but I promise it will set you free. You cannot text your way into someone's readiness. You cannot love a man into wanting consistency if inconsistency is what feels comfortable to him. And the woman who finally accepts this is not giving up on love. She is refusing to keep auditioning for a role that was never actually being offered. This is the moment where the real transformation deepens, because up until now, we've talked about what she stops doing. But something new starts happening too, and this is the part that I think is genuinely beautiful. She starts paying attention to consistency instead of chemistry. This sounds simple, but it is one of the most powerful shifts a woman can make in how she chooses love. Chemistry is instant and intoxicating and frankly, almost meaningless as a predictor of whether someone will treat you well. Consistency is boring by comparison, at least at first. It's someone who texts back at a normal pace every single time, not just when it's convenient. It's someone whose actions on a random Tuesday match the promises made on a romantic Friday night. A healed woman learns to feel a small thrill, not from the unpredictable highs of a man who runs hot and cold, but from the deep, settled safety of a man who is simply, reliably there. She also starts noticing red flags at the moment they appear instead of 6 months later. This is what betrayal actually teaches if you let it teach you rather than just hurt you. It sharpens intuition. The woman who once ignored the vague feeling in her stomach because she didn't want to seem paranoid now trusts that feeling immediately. When he's cagey about his phone, she notices. When his stories don't quite line up, she notices. When he says one thing and does another, she doesn't spend 3 weeks constructing an innocent explanation for him. She simply notices, and she lets that information inform her decisions instead of overriding it with hope. And here's something fascinating about this shift that most people don't expect. The more a woman develops this kind of clear-eyed self-respect, the more certain kinds of men become almost obsessed with earning her attention. Not the men who wanted an easy, low-effort connection. Those men fade away quickly once they realize she's not available for that anymore. And good riddance. But the men who are actually capable of real intimacy, the ones who have done their own work, who understand what it means to build trust slowly and prove it consistently, those men are drawn to exactly this energy. Because on some level, everyone, men included, wants to be with someone who has standards. Standards signal safety. If she has boundaries with you, it means she'll have boundaries for you too. It means she won't let anyone disrespect the relationship, including him, if he ever tries to take it for granted. I want to gently address something here because I know some of you listening are in the thick of this right now and it doesn't feel powerful yet. It feels like grief, and I want to honor that because healing is not a straight line, and anyone who tells you it is has probably never actually been through real heartbreak. There will be nights where you replay the good memories and wonder if you gave up too soon. There will be moments where you see something that reminds you of him and your chest tightens before your brain even catches up. That is not weakness. That is the natural cost of having loved someone real, even if what he gave back wasn't real in return. Grieve it. Let yourself feel it fully. The woman who skips this step and tries to girl boss her way past heartbreak usually finds that the unprocessed pain shows up later in the next relationship, wearing a different disguise. But here is what I need you to know is waiting for you on the other side of that grief, because it is worth the walk through it. There is a version of you who no longer organizes her worth around whether a particular man chooses her. There is a version of you who can meet someone new, feel real chemistry, and still calmly watch to see whether his actions match his words, before you hand him access to your heart. There is a version of you who has learned the most valuable lesson in all of romantic life, which is this: the right person will never require you to become smaller, quieter, less certain of yourself in order to keep them. If someone's love for you depends on you performing an edited, convenient version of yourself, that was never love to begin with. It was an audition, and you were free to walk off that stage the entire time. Let's talk about what actually attracts a high-quality man, because I think this gets confused constantly in dating culture. It is not perfection. It is not being endlessly agreeable. It is not suppressing your needs so he never has to deal with anything uncomfortable. What genuinely attracts a secure, emotionally available man is a woman who is fully herself, who communicates clearly, who has a life and identity independent of him, and who treats him with warmth while still holding real standards. That combination, warmth plus standards, is rare. And it is magnetic in a way that performing perfection never will be. Because performing perfection is exhausting and eventually it cracks. Being genuinely yourself with clear boundaries is sustainable, and sustainable is what actually builds a relationship that lasts. I also want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough, which is the difference between being guarded and being discerning. After betrayal, it's tempting to build a wall so high that nothing can ever hurt you again. I understand the instinct completely, but a wall doesn't just keep out the people who would hurt you. It keeps out the people who might have genuinely loved you well too. The goal isn't to stop trusting. The goal is to trust wisely, gradually, based on demonstrated behavior over time rather than declared intentions in week one. Discernment says, I'm open, but you'll need to show me, not just tell me. A wall says, nobody gets in ever because I'd rather be lonely than hurt again. One of those choices leads to a rich, connected life. The other one, while understandable, quietly costs you the very thing you actually want. I think about the women I've talked to who went through exactly this kind of betrayal, and the ones who came out the other side genuinely thriving all share a specific pattern. They didn't rush the healing. They didn't jump into the next relationship to prove to themselves or to him that they were fine. They spent real time rebuilding their relationship with themselves first. They asked hard questions, not why did he leave, but what did I learn about what I need, what I'll no longer tolerate, and who I actually am when I'm not performing for someone else's approval. That question, asked honestly, is where real transformation lives. And something interesting happens once a woman does that work. She stops fearing being single. This might sound small, but it is genuinely one of the most freeing shifts a person can experience. So much of the anxiety in dating comes from a fear that if this doesn't work out, you'll be alone forever. And that fear makes you tolerate things you shouldn't tolerate, ignore things you shouldn't ignore, stay quiet about things that deserve a voice. Once a woman is genuinely at peace being on her own, dating changes completely. It stops being about avoiding loneliness and starts being about genuinely evaluating whether this person adds something real to an already good life. That shift alone will change every relationship you have from that point forward, because you are no longer choosing from fear, you're choosing from abundance. I want to give you something practical here, because I don't just want to leave you with a feeling, I want to leave you with something you can actually use. When you meet someone new after a betrayal like this, pay attention to 3 things instead of 1. Most people only pay attention to how someone makes them feel in the moment, and that's exactly how they get pulled back into old patterns. Because a charming, inconsistent man can make you feel incredible in the moment while quietly being terrible for you long term. So watch how he makes you feel, yes, but also watch how consistent his actions are with his words over time, and watch how he treats people who can do nothing for him, the waiter, the rideshare driver, his own family. Those 3 data points together tell you far more truth than chemistry alone ever will. Second, give yourself permission to ask direct questions early and pay close attention not just to the answer, but to how comfortable he is being asked. A secure man doesn't flinch when you ask what he's looking for. He might not have every answer figured out, and that's fine. Nobody does. But he'll engage with the question honestly instead of deflecting, joking it away, or making you feel like you asked something inappropriate. The way someone responds to a reasonable question tells you almost everything about how safe it will feel to be vulnerable with them later. Third, notice how he handles your boundaries in the small moments long before the big ones matter. If you say you can't talk tonight because you're exhausted, does he respect that easily, or does he make you feel guilty for having a limit? Small boundary moments are a preview of how big boundary moments will go later. Pay attention to the preview. I know this has been a lot, and I want to bring it back to where we started because I think it matters. The old version of you, the one who gave endlessly, who forgave quickly, who stayed hopeful long after hope stopped being reasonable, she was never the problem. Her heart was never too big. Her love was never too much. She simply gave that love to someone who didn't have the capacity, the maturity, or the honesty to protect it. And the pain of realizing that is real, and it deserves to be honored, not rushed past. But on the other side of that pain is someone extraordinary, a woman who knows her worth isn't up for negotiation, who has learned to read behavior instead of hoping her way through confusion, who gives love generously but never again at the cost of abandoning herself, who understands finally deeply that the right person will never make her question whether she deserves to be chosen. He will simply choose her, clearly, consistently, without her having to convince him. That woman is not cold. She's not hardened. She's not difficult, no matter what anyone who benefited from her old patterns might say about the change in her. She is simply finally whole. And whole is not something you become by finding the right man. Whole is what makes you recognizable to him when he finally shows up. There's one more thing I want to walk through with you, because I think it's the piece that actually determines whether this transformation sticks or whether it quietly reverses itself the next time someone charming comes along. It's this: healing is not the same as forgetting, and it's not the same as pretending the hurt never mattered. Real healing means you can hold two things at once. You can acknowledge that what happened to you was genuinely painful, that you were treated in a way you didn't deserve, and at the same time refuse to let that experience become the lens through which you view every future relationship. That balance is hard to strike. Swing too far one way and you stay bitter, guarded, convinced that everyone eventually reveals themselves as a disappointment. Swing too far the other way and you rush to prove the past wrong, ignoring genuine warning signs because you're desperate for this next one to be different. The women who come out of this the strongest are the ones who learn to sit in the uncomfortable middle, open but observant, hopeful but not naive, kind but no longer available to anyone who hasn't earned it. I also want to talk honestly about what happens when the man who betrayed you eventually notices the change, because he will. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Men who are used to being chased have a strange, almost predictable reaction when the chasing stops. There's often a resurfacing, a message out of nowhere, a thinking about you text that arrives suspiciously close to a moment when he's feeling unwanted somewhere else in his life. This is one of the most important moments in the entire transformation because it's the test of whether the healing actually took root. The old version of her would have felt a rush of validation, would have wondered if this meant he'd finally realized what he lost, might have even let herself hope again. The healed version of her can feel the pull of that old chemistry, because chemistry doesn't just vanish, and still recognize it for what it actually is, not remorse, not growth.